Today I have an extremely interesting guest, writer, podcaster, YouTuber, lecturer, style coach. It's been a pleasure to have Tanner Guzy on the channel. Men we don't think about style as much as we probably should.
Right.
How can changing our dress improve society? Or can it?
It can. It absolutely can. You know, a suit is good and a t-shirt is bad. It's like, well, it's not. It depends on where you are and who you're around. But don't think that in order to dress well, you have to either dress more formally, you have to embrace a ton of color, or that you have to embrace a ton of pattern. You don't have to do any of those. In a way that signals dignity, it will absolutely change the world.
What do you think are the principles or values that lead to successful nations?
A nation's primary responsibility is to step in where culture fails.
How can we be successful?
You have to have the audacity to actually believe that you're capable of becoming more than what you are.
I mean, that's a really good answer. I was hoping it was going to have something to do with neckties. but Today I have an extremely interesting guest. He's guru of masculine style, author of The Appearance of Power, writer, podcaster, YouTuber, lecturer, style coach, and he also has a TED Talk, Should a Man Care About His Clothes? He's lectured at 21 conventions. He's also the co-creator of Chest Magazine, a magazine for men with chests. I love that tagline. I'd like to welcome Mr. Tanner Guzy to the show. Guzy.
Yep. 50-50 chance, you got it. You were close.
You know, I actually checked that to see if I was going to say it right. Mm-hmm. And I was like, okay, it's like Guzzle, Guzy.
Yes, Guzy, like the kids called me Fuzzy Guzy in high school.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Well, when I was trying to remember, I was like Guzy, Cuzzy was a...
There you go,
Guzy,
right?
Cuzzy
Yes,
was a bear.
yes.
All right, so your backstory is not on the internet.
Right.
And I know you're very intentional about your appearance, your persona, your presentation. I have to conclude that this is intentional, that it's not on the internet. And I have a feeling that this is because you were maybe raised by jungle lions.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah, I can't let any of that out of the bag, or
no,
else I
I
get in
actually
trouble.
have some proof here.
Yes.
So if you'll compare the addendum.
Oh man.
As you can see, there is a strong resemblance, but
The lion's mane comparison never gets old. I always appreciate that one, so thank you.
Well, what is your cover story or backstory?
Man, so I think part of the reason that I don't have it out so much on the main site or anything is because I get the opportunity to share it a lot on different shows. I'm born and raised in Salt Lake City, kind of South Salt Lake City area. Oldest of 5, member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, been a member my whole life. Served 2 years in a mission in Toronto, speaking Spanish. I've been married twice. I'm on my second marriage. We're 10 years strong, and we've got 5 kids of our own. Wow. Yeah, so
that's awesome.
It's fun. I love it. I love being a dad. We were talking even a little bit before you and I got started about kind of how you've had this epiphany and how your mission has changed. And I know for me, marriage and fatherhood have really developed a lot of that, where I was pretty go along to get along, not super ambitious, didn't have a lot of drive until I had the full burden of responsibility of leading a family by having a more traditional setup with my wife and then having these kids that are responsible, that I'm responsible for. And it's done a lot for me to kind of get me to grow up and step up, and it's been really fun. Yeah.
Nice, that's awesome. Well, your last name, Guzy, is Polish, right?
As far as, we haven't been able to totally trace it back yet, but we think that, I mean, we know that's from somewhere in that old Austro-Hungarian Empire, Poland, Czechoslovakia, somewhere within there. Yeah.
Well, I think we looked it up, and it's actually, it may be Polish for thin. Have you ever looked up the meaning?
Yes. Yes.
So I find it interesting that your ancestors were known for their looks, mm-hmm. and you are now known for your style and looks.
Yeah. Well, and I have a funny story for that. So, yeah, there is that meaning of being thin. And one of my brothers, he's so skinny. He's an endurance athlete, has always just been really, really skinny. And so his friends in high school called him the 2x4 because that was about what his proportions were. And so their nickname for our family was the 2x4ist because everybody, my whole family is relatively thin. I'm the only one who's done any sort of focus on strength training or anything, and I'm by no means jacked, but I've got a little bit more meat on me than most of my siblings who all very much still fit within that endurance athlete aesthetic. Yeah.
Nice. Well, I've seen you doing some weightlifting. That's pretty cool. I try to keep up on the weights myself. I haven't done any deadlifting, but I think that's one of your fortes, right?
It's definitely probably my strongest lift, and it's one of my favorites too. Yeah.
That's awesome. Well, I read your book. Again, it's called The Appearance of Power. And actually, I listened to it, I should be honest.
Cool, no worries. So you got to listen to me read it to you.
Yeah, actually, and that's great. I love to hear from the author, actually. Sometimes I like it better. Anyways, very well put together, very thoughtful. Learned a lot. Honestly, I think it's one of the first style books that I've really sat down and read. And I think that goes back to something you talk about a lot, where we don't think about style as much as we probably should.
Right.
And we're going to talk more about that in this interview. But what inspired you to write the book?
There is a more, we'll say noble or altruistic reason, and then there's also a little bit more of like a business-oriented kind of selfish reason with it too. The first one was really that I'd been writing about this. I started Masculine Style, the blog, 10 years ago. And I'm sure that it would be legitimate to say that I'm hypersensitive to appearance and what it communicates. I was sensitive about this in junior high and high school, being involved in like the punk rock and BMX scenes, but going to a private school where we had to dress more like you and I are dressed now, and the conflict with all that.
Interesting.
And so I've started writing about it, and found that a lot of people really resonated with my approach, which is not here's how to tie a tie or here's what type of shoes you should wear based on what's in trend this summer, but more of the psychological or even the philosophical components. Why is it that men don't care about how they look or pretend to not care about how they look? Has that always been the case? How is masculinity expressed? How is it expressed to women? How is it expressed to other men? What are all these variables that come in with it? And after having written for a number of years, I realized that a book was a really good place to compile all of these ideas, put them into something that would be pretty easily digestible so that people who were totally unfamiliar with the way that I teach wouldn't have to try to pour through hours of old YouTube videos or blog posts that can feel all disjointed, but they can actually follow it in a pretty linear and a very built upon way. So that's the altruistic reason. The other reason is honestly, there's just a lot of credibility that comes with being an author. And it's great for marketing. It gets me on bigger podcasts and gets me on bigger shows. And so it helps me share my message in a way that it lends a lot more credibility than just being a blogger did before.
Yeah. So were you ever a writer growing up? Did you find you had a talent for words, or is this something that that life has thrust upon you?
Man, okay. So I've always been good with words. I always hated writing. In fact, I remember my senior year, I took an AP English class. And we'd read a new classic every month. It may have been Tess of the D'Urbervilles or Crime and Punishment or Heart of Darkness or any of these kind of classics. And I didn't read a single book that entire year. But I was really, really good at jumping in on the discussion with the class when we were in there. So I was my teacher's favorite student, still passed everything. So I've always been good at being able to kind of pull principles out of things and then express them in a way that resonates with people or that's kind of easily digestible. And then it was a matter of figuring out how to turn that into the written language. And so I had written other blogs, I'd written some religious stuff, some political stuff, and I got sick of the heaviness of that, but I wanted to get better at writing. And so I thought, well, why not try a style blog and see if that's something that I can, continue to sharpen my ability to write, but enjoy what I'm writing instead of it feeling so doom and gloom all the time. And thus Masculine Style was born.
Well, I had no idea you were into political writing, which is really cool. I'm now more excited about the first section of this interview than I was. We're not going to get too political, but it is more philosophical.
Cool.
So I think that'll resonate with you. You're fond of saying we do judge books by their cover.
Yeah.
The cover of your book is interesting. What was the reasoning behind that, or what were you trying to convey with the cover of your book?
So I had two things that I was looking at. The first one was illustrating that you can go to any point in time in history, you can go to any culture across the world, and you will find that men care about their appearance. and there are very distinct ways that men dress, which is why you get an Eskimo or a cowboy or a pirate or any of these other things that are very easily recognizable and very easily represented on the cover of the book. And it's pretty easy to think about how comical it would be if we were to be watching a film and it's a period piece that's, you know, maybe it's Treasure Island and somebody's got a wristwatch on, or they're wearing something that completely modernizes it or throws you out of what the time period is. You can't go watch something about the ancient Aborigines in Australia and see them wearing a pair of Crocs or a pair of cargo shorts. And that's because there's a consistent aesthetic for who they are. So there was that aspect of it. And then in addition to that, I went for a little bit more of like a propaganda kind of Soviet era style for the aesthetic. And a lot of that was really just because there is, with the way that things are today, as far as like our aesthetic Overton window, things that we associate with different looks or things like that, there's kind of an association with early 20th century propaganda and more of that hyper physical masculinity, and so I was playing both of those against each other.
Nice.
Yeah.
Well, one thing that came to our minds was the village people.
Yep, I get that one a lot.
Okay.
Yep. Yep.
I hate to be ringing on the same bell, but yours actually looks more unified, so I think the people on your cover took some of your style tips maybe, and the village people.
But what a good example of how you can create these different, you can evoke different feelings by dressing in ways that are completely disparate.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Interesting. So you don't talk about women much, but I know you have a couple in your life. What's their relationship with masculinity, or how do they feel about masculinity?
So like I said, when we first started, my wife and I have a very traditional approach to marriage. I'm the patriarch, I'm the head of the household. It's my responsibility to set the tone, and the buck stops with me when it comes to leading and making decisions. And my wife really loves that she doesn't have to make decisions. And she loves that it's an opportunity for her to trust me to not just be selfish in what's good for me, but also to do what's best for the family. At the same time, my wife's incredibly intelligent, if not a complete genius. She's got a wonderful, not only just a head on her shoulders as far as the ability to understand things, but her insights on things. It's funny how often I will come to some new conclusion based on a blog post that I've read or a conversation I've had with a colleague. And she'll be like, oh yeah, I remember we talked about that 2 years ago, and this is something I've been doing for a little while. And she's very good-natured about it. And so my wife is absolutely a partner with me in how we raise. We've got 4 daughters and a son. So she's absolutely a partner with me in that. And what we try to do is understand the complementary natures of our roles. As I focus on being a man and being masculine and kind of taking what those roles are, it gives her the space to focus on being a woman, being feminine and doing what those roles are, and vice versa. As she's freed up to focus on that, then allows me to expand. My friend Ken Curry, who's a marriage and family therapist, he talks about this idea that most of us tend to think of power as a zero-sum game, sadly, especially in a marriage where if I have power in the marriage, then my wife doesn't, or if she has power, then I don't. And that happens when you try to be equal in that you're trying to be the same, and whose turn is it to do the chores, or whose turn is it to focus on this, or you're kind of wrestling and competing with each other. But when you focus on the complementary nature of husbands and wives, of men and women, then you realize that power is not zero-sum at all, it's incredibly complementary. And so it gives me the opportunity to expand in my power, which gives her the opportunity to expand in her power, and so it creates this very virtuous cycle for both of us.
Nice. So it sounds like what you're saying is your wife appreciates your masculinity, you appreciate her femininity. This is amazing. Like, what do you call this alternative lifestyle?
Traditional families, right? Everything that we've practiced from the beginning of history until the middle of the 20th century, the alternative.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Well, that's awesome. All right, so we're going to take a break. We'll be back with you in a moment, and maybe we'll have a word from our sponsors. Who knows what will be in this break, but I'm sure it'll be good. We'll see you in a second. We're back with Tanner Guzy, and I think I got that right this time.
You got it right. We did it.
So this next section of the interview is called Wise Up. So the mission of MyNiceTie now is to both for ourselves and encourage other men to wise up, suit up, and stand up.
Okay.
So it all starts with Wise Up. And Wise Up is about the values, principles, attributes, wisdom, stories, vision that lead to successful individuals, communities, and nations.
Okay.
So how do you define success? So we're going to talk in general about success. What is success to you?
Man, that is not an easy question, is it?
No.
I've thought about this a lot, especially within the context, again, of family and having the perpetuation of family being what I consider to be my primary role. And so what I would say is success is knowing that I've taken the good things that my ancestors did and I've helped build upon them. I've taken the things that they may have not done as well and helped circumvent having to put my kids through those same things, but then also helped them catch that same vision so that they continue that tradition on and on with their kids. One of the events that I speak at is this the 21 convention, and there's a whole little section of it that's geared towards fathers. It's called the Patriarch event. And patriarchy is an interesting thing for me because I've got young kids. You know, my oldest is 9, my youngest is 7 months old. And I won't know if I'm successful as a patriarch, as a husband, as a father, in any of these contexts that really matter to me until I see how my kids raise their kids and how those kids turn out. And so for me, success is a very long-term approach, but it's basically how do I transmit my values into the people that matter the most and help them become the best versions of themselves.
Nice. I mean, that's a really good answer. I was hoping it was going to have something to do with neckties.
If only, right?
All right, so continuing in that vein, what do you think are the principles that lead to success? Fundamental principles for individual success. How can we be successful?
I think aspiration is the first one. You have to have the audacity to actually believe that you're capable of becoming more than what you are. And we live in a postmodern civilization that tells us not only that you can't, but largely that you're immoral for thinking that you could or should be better than you think you are, that you're perfect exactly as you are, and that anybody who tells you otherwise doesn't embrace you, they don't love you, they don't accept you, and so you have to maintain whatever your current status quo is and accept that that's the best version of yourself. And so having really the balls to be able to say, no, I can be better, I want to be better, I recognize that there is an objective better than where I am right now. I think that's the biggest fundamental that we face right now. The next thing I think it requires is a really good, healthy combination between both motivation and discipline. A lot of guys tend to get really focused on just one. They think, okay, I'm going to get motivated. How do I stay motivated? What do I do here? And motivation is awesome from an emotional perspective, but it doesn't carry you through on anything. No real change happens within the realm of motivation. You have to break into the realm of discipline in order to be able to get to where that change is. At the same time, if all you operate under is discipline and not motivation, then you're not willing to take the next chance or take the next risk and start to find out what that next level of aspiration should be. Maybe it's aesthetic aspiration, maybe it's financial, maybe it's from a relationship, maybe it's spiritual aspiration. But motivation, if you're not willing to allow yourself to get emotionally excited about whatever that next level is, then you can stagnate there as well. So yeah, I would say the fundamentals are aspiration and then that really good balance between motivation and discipline.
Nice. Well, we don't want to get too political here, but like I said, I'm excited that you do
nothing
have
off limits. Yeah.
some background in politics, at least writing. What do you think are the principles or values that lead to successful nations or communities?
I am of the opinion that a nation's primary responsibility is to step in where culture fails. This is where, for a long time, I considered myself to be a libertarian, and I don't anymore, largely because my experience with most libertarians is that they believe that we can have both a laissez-faire government, where basically as long as you're not physically hurting somebody or trampling on somebody else's rights, then there should really be no role of the government. But then they also take a very similar laissez-faire approach to culture. And you can't have both. You can't have an anything goes civilization. So if you want a really small government, like the incredible government that our founders gave us, they were able to provide that because they had a very big culture with lots of checks and balances with things like aspiration or shame or welcoming and honor, but also ostracization and being expelled and all of these things. It was a very big culture that allowed for a small government. To me, that's the ideal. I want a big culture, I want a small government, and you have to have both. The problem that we're experiencing now is we see government as the creator of culture. The best way that I've heard this put is politics is downstream of culture, but the way that we perpetuate it, or at least the way the federal government perpetuates it now, is that culture and everything else is downstream of federal government, and it's putting the cart before the horse, and it puts us in a dangerous position. So I think if we can get back to letting culture have the biggest impact on people, especially a culture that values family and allows for, not only allows for, but celebrates and rewards kids being raised with both a father and a mother, that, again, that complementary nature of men and women. When we have that big of a culture, then we can get back to the place where government takes its proper role.
Nice. So speaking of culture, gentlemen used to be a bigger part of our culture. It's now becoming more and more rare in our society. What does the word gentleman mean to you?
Man, I hate that I've gotten so cynical about this term, because I really have. Now when I see most guys trying to create gentlemen or focus on the idea of being a gentleman, they are trying to accept all of the trappings, whether that's aesthetics or manners or language or anything else, but it's all of the trappings and all of the demonstrations of what it was to be a gentleman, to accept all of the responsibilities that would come. You know, you talk about chivalry, and chivalry is dead, and it's because men don't do the things that they used to do. But there were also expectations for women. Chivalry only worked when you had both parties that were willing to do, not only accept the privileges, but also accept the responsibilities. And sadly today, I would say most gentlemen get focused on looking like and accepting the responsibilities without fully claiming the rights or the privileges that come with being a gentleman, nor teaching their daughters or helping hold their wives or the other women in their lives accountable to what it meant to be a lady. So I don't think that you can have gentlemen without having ladies. I do think it's our responsibility as men to lead out on that front, but part of leading out is helping women understand the value in being held accountable to what it is to be ladies, as opposed to this kind of amorphous world that we find ourselves in now.
Yeah. So I think what you're saying is men don't wear enough ties.
That's it. Again, yep. I love that you just summarized these things so beautifully.
All right, so masculinity, if masculinity is suffering, maybe we don't have enough masculine activities. What are some masculine activities that you think are in short supply today?
Oh, dude, I've never been asked this, and I love this question. Everything. I mean, oh gosh, everything. And especially when it comes to, again, culture creation. We don't have enough masculinity in art. We don't have enough of it in music. I mean, the idea that our music, our relationship with music now is that I put on my AirPods and I just consume something that was created by a bunch of pop artists to elicit a specific like trance state and emotion from me, as opposed to the way that men used to experience music is you were on the ship or you were in the trenches and you were singing with your men, and it was full-throated and it was a production as opposed to a consumption, and it built brotherhood as opposed to just being something that you could fangirl out about your favorite artist. So music, I think the idea of brotherhood is something that we're missing out on completely. You get it to, especially with married men, where we have this very perverted idea that our wives are supposed to fulfill every single one of our relationship needs. And that's unfair pressure to put on them, and it's unfair pressure for them to put on us if they think that we're supposed to fulfill all their needs. We need fraternity, we need real brotherhood just as much as we need marriage. And too many men either run away from it because we've convinced over the last 50 years that if you care that much about the opinions of other men, it's because you're sexually interested in them. And you can throw out the moral implications of that. If you're a straight man, whatever your opinion is on homosexuality, you don't want to project that you're sexually interested in other men, even if you don't have any moral qualms with it, so we stay away from it. And so we've killed off fraternity by sexualizing it. We've killed off fraternity by focusing on marriage being the end-all be-all of relationships. We've killed off any sort of masculinity in aesthetics and culture. We've nice-guyed ourselves into thinking that the most agreeable, the nicest, the kindest, the most comfort-seeking man is somehow the best person. as opposed to, again, understanding that masculinity has inherent rights and responsibilities that come with it. And we just run away from both of those. And so there are, man, again, there's so many different things that come into this, but all of those things, for me especially, art, fashion, film, music, all of it. Again, if we were to inject more masculinity into those aspects of culture, it would change the entire landscape of how we view men and women.
That's awesome. So I have a list from Cosmopolitan magazine of 16 manly things. I may not say them all, but I want to kind of do a fun activity with you. I'm going to say something manly. I just want your first thought that comes. Maybe it's a word, maybe it's a phrase, but your first thought with these manly things, okay?
Okay.
So first, beards.
Yeah, I mean, it is if you actually are masculine, but it's a crappy, it's a crappy mask if you're not.
Okay.
Yeah.
Big dogs.
Are you hunting with them? If so, yes, manly.
Cars, especially loud gas guzzlers.
Not unless you're racing them. Otherwise, it's just overcompensating.
Okay. Guns.
Yeah, as long as you know how to use it and use it for the right reasons. But absolutely, a right not exercised is a right lost. So very pro-gun, pro-Second Amendment, all that.
Steaks.
Steaks are one of those things that's kind of a boomer masculinity, where it's somehow if I eat it, it makes me a man, even though I kowtow to my wife or I give up to my boss or anything else. So by all means, eat your meat, but don't think that that's the only thing it takes to be a man.
Nice. Leather jackets.
Yeah, if you ride a bike or you fly a plane or something else, then go for it.
Fighting.
Yes, men need to learn how to fight, and they need to do it frequently. Fighting should be fighting. Yeah, we need to engage in more combat sports. That was a big game changer for me, and we would be a lot healthier as men if we could engage in combat sport, not like fighting at the bar because of some stupid slight, but actually learning how to fight. It would increase so much of that fraternity. It would increase our sense of self. Fighting is a good thing, and we need to do more of it.
Yeah, I see that with my boys. I try to wrestle with them a lot, and that's a really good way to bond with your kids.
Yep.
All right, so football.
Consumer masculinity. You can be into football as long as you play it as much as you watch it.
Nice. Explosions.
James Bond. That's the only thing that comes to mind with that. Yeah.
Nice. Bruce Willis.
Oh man. Yeah. I mean, Die Hard and Yippee-Ki-Yay and all that. Sure.
Building things.
Yeah. That's masculine creativity. We need more of that too.
Awesome. Lumberjacking. This is one of my favorites. Lumberjacking. I don't even know what that is.
Right? I mean, to me, and sadly, the association, most people just think of like hipsters, like lumbersexuals, that it's not even a real thing. So again, if you do it right, if you're homesteading, if you're living off the grid, that is an awesome expression of masculinity. But if you got the beard and the flannel and the boots and perfectly manicured nails, doesn't work.
Well, that led into 13, flannel.
Yeah, flannel. I mean, we're in Utah, wear it when it's appropriate, but don't think that it's the only thing you should have in your closet.
Yeah. Back to functional, it's functional. Being good at something stupid like eating the most pizza.
No, I think that's a very childish version of masculinity.
Here's one I almost didn't mention, but I will. This is a family channel, but I'll mention it. Whiskey.
I don't know. I'm a teetotaler, so I certainly don't think that you need to be associated with alcohol to be a man. And sadly, I think a lot of men will do it just like they do with a lot of this other consumer masculinity, that I can give up on all of these other things, but if I've got my bacon and my beer and my whiskey and boobs, then I'm set. And it's more than that.
Yeah. Well, I won't go through the rest of them, but one I would like to add is neckties.
Mm-hmm.
What
neckties. Okay. I knew we were going to have this conversation. You ready for my whole take on neckties?
You have to, man. Yeah.
I lament the fact that neckties are dying. But I think they are. I think that the idea of formal wear was already making its way out. One, because we're no longer a homogenous culture within the West. We've culturally balkanized, even if we haven't done it geographically yet. You get very small micro tribes, and you get a lot of people who resent what the 20th century was, what that kind of hegemonic American culture was in the 20th century. And so for now, I mean, you can look at the most influential people in the world, the most influential and wealthiest men in the world, and they all hate ties. They all hate suits. They want nothing to do with them. And in a lot of cultures, Whether, if you're in a creative field, or you're in tech, or you're in a blue collar environment, ties are anathema, suits are anathema. And I hate it because it represents so much dignity. It represents such a good, clean aesthetic, and it used to be largely unifying, but I think we're losing it. And I think that as we saw more and more remote work with COVID, we're going to be losing it even faster. And I think guys like us are going to be dinosaurs and relics pretty soon.
Well, we are now at MyNiceTie, by the way, we're focusing more on menswear accessories. And neckties are one of the accessories, but they're definitely worn less.
Yeah.
The question is, are they going to go away forever? That's a good question. I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know. I think, I don't think anytime soon, although they're downtrending.
Right.
But part of me wonders if they'll be around still for a couple hundred years.
I think they will be, unless we experience something that is a major, major cultural revolution. If we go something that is the equivalent of the fall of Rome, or the end of the Ottoman Empire, or something else where you have a complete rejection of everything that a society was, to the point, and who knows, maybe we're seeing that. I mean, you're seeing statues torn down, you're seeing monuments raised, you're seeing all these things happen. And so I hope that we hold on and we don't experience that, because there's so much good to be celebrated between the 19th and 20th century and that culture of a suit and a tie. And so I hope we don't lose it.
So back to the cosmopolitan list. I know I distracted you with the necktie comment, but anything they missed, anything that comes to mind that's like masculine? That
Production. You got to produce more than you consume.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's good.
Yeah.
Another one that I noticed that they missed is fatherhood.
Yep.
Yeah.
And that's another tricky one too. My friend Jack Donovan, I think this was in his book, Becoming a Barbarian. It may have been A More Complete Beast. Either way, his books are all worth reading. But he talks about this idea of masculinity, and you take a 17-year-old kid that enlisted in World War II, and he dies fighting for his country. He's not missing any masculinity because he never got to be a father. At the same time, he never got to realize his full masculine potential because he didn't get to be a father either. And so I think that there's a balance that needs to be had there, where any male won't see his full potential until he raises kids, but by no means are we devoid of masculinity just because we may not get that opportunity.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Great. Well said. So, that's very wise. Any other words of wisdom that you live by while we finish up this section on Wise Up?
Man, I think really what I hit on at the end is you got to produce more than you consume. I think sadly so much of masculinity today is consumer driven. It's what sports am I interested in? It's what's the latest IPA that I get excited about drinking? And it's literally bread and circuses, where we're being entertained into oblivion. We're consuming ourselves into oblivion. And you see this from a clothing perspective. I'm sure you guys see this on the channel all the time, where why should I care about how I look? Or all I want to do is be comfortable, and the tie's not comfortable. It's a noose around my neck or anything else. And it really is just this placid, mediocre, consumer-driven version of masculinity. And if you want to wise up, you have to start producing instead of just consuming.
Yeah. So you and I share the belief that the sloppiness of our dress is related to some of the things that we're seeing in society, like symptoms in our society or larger problems in our society. How can changing our dress improve society? Or can it?
It can. It absolutely can. And where most people get this wrong is they think that the most powerful aspect of changing how we dress is that it changes other people's perceptions of who we are. And there's real power in that, absolutely. This is why we judge books by their covers. This is why we're visual creatures. At the same time, the real power in changing how we dress is that it changes our self-perception. I get to see this with my coaching clients all the time. Whether it's young guys, old guys, guys that are in blue collar environments or white collar, they can be in Australia, they can be in the United States, it doesn't matter. The biggest impact that learning to dress intentionally has on these men is they see themselves as so much more than they ever thought that they were. And these are men that are financially well off, they're in great shape, they've got relationships, or at least some measure of a couple of those things dialed in. But when the guy that you see looking back at you in the mirror, or the guy that you see on your social media feed, or the guy that's on the family photo that hangs over the mantle, is dignified and respectable and is somebody who looks aspirational, who doesn't look like he's just given up, is somebody who looks like he's still conquering new things, and is somebody who looks like he's leading his family well. And when that's what you see, all of a sudden you start to act that way because that dissonance drives you crazy. So you either go back to dressing like a bum and acting like a bum, or you start to act in a way that actually reflects what these things are that you project. And so it doesn't have to be suits and ties, but if we had more men dressing in a way that signaled dignity, it would absolutely change the world.
Last question for Wise Up. What's the balance between trying to look our best and putting too much focus on appearance to where it may become prideful?
Ooh. Okay, I would say the biggest difference on that is thinking that our primary value is in our appearance. Because we're in this kind of counter world that says that there's no value in appearance whatsoever. There's certainly other civilizations and different points in history that you can go look at where basically it didn't matter who I was on the inside as long as I projected myself to be the way that I was supposed to be on the outside. And really what we need is the balance and the synergy between the two of them. You need to develop your inner character and your inner person infinitely more than your exterior, but you also need to recognize that the exterior not only reflects but helps shape that interior person, and it has inherent value in and of itself.
Nice. Well, Tanner's just dropped a bunch of wisdom on us. We're going to take a break, and when we get back, we're going to talk about suiting up, which is the second section or third section of the interview. So give us a minute, we'll be back. All right, so we're back with Tanner, and now we're going to talk about suiting up. Suiting up is all about presentation, styles, plans, goals that can help us be successful. You are like the perfect person to talk about this section of our mission. And the first question is, on your website, you state that men who are competent and confident in their dress don't necessarily have to work harder than other men. Let me give you an example. So when I decided to grow this beard, I've realized it takes a little bit more work than, just shaving all the time.
Right.
But it's offset by the amount of shaving that I had to do. So it almost balances out, but it is a little bit more work. So help me understand what you mean by that phrase.
One of the things that I love helping, whether it's my audience or certainly other people's audiences that are kind of antagonistic to what we talk about with style, understand is that, and I'm sure that this is your experience too, I don't spend a lot of time in the mirror primping and getting ready. I don't really think about my own particular clothes much more than the average guy does. I continue to buy from my favorite brands. I'm on my third pair of jeans from a company I've been buying from the last 8 years, and I know that they fit, and I'm happy to keep buying from them. I think the best way to be able to explain that is that it's almost like learning how to read and write, where it takes a lot of work to learn how to read and write. It really does. And you have to put in the time, and your hand cramps, or you get frustrated because there's all these little nuanced words, especially with a difficult language like English. And it takes years and years to be able to figure it out. And it's even worse if you're trying to figure it out all by yourself. It's much faster if you have a really competent mentor that can teach you how to do it. So literacy is powerful, and aesthetic literacy is the same thing. When you get to the point, you have to put in the work to learn how to do it. But just like I'm sure you don't think that much about what you're typing on your computer anymore. It is literally just an exact transmission of the ideas that are in your head onto paper or onto the screen. And you don't have to think about it when you're sending a text to your wife or you're posting something on social media. The actual mechanics of it don't cross your mind anymore. It's completely intuitive. That's what good style is. You don't think about it. You just know it so well that it becomes instantaneous and intuitive, and you know exactly what you want to do with it. And so when you get good at it, you really don't have to do anything more than anybody else does. And you still get infinitely better results as well.
So any special tips for the laziest among us? Do you have any style tips that can help those people that are like, oh man, that sounds like a lot of work just to learn?
Yeah. Don't get trapped where a lot of beginners do in thinking that in order to dress well, you have to either dress more formally, you have to embrace a ton of color, or that you have to embrace a ton of pattern. You don't have to do any of those. You can have a very good wardrobe that is, a lot of guys, again, let's say you work in tech. You can do t-shirt, jeans, and sneakers every day, and that can work for you really well. And it can be simple colors, and that can work for you really well. And it can be zero patterns, and that can work really well. Focus on fit, focus on texture, focus on the quality of what you're wearing. And then the other thing that makes that really to your advantage is that, and I'm this way personally, most of what I have in my closet works with everything else that I have in my closet. So I can get dressed in the dark. I don't have to think that hard about it. And the more versatile you can make your wardrobe, again, by not having this huge disparity of these are my really formal pieces and this is my really casual stuff, or I've got this with this very specific pattern and this with this very specific color, but the more neutral you can make stuff, the easier it's going to be on you.
Nice. Couple questions, specific questions about style. Are mullets ever a good thing?
Yeah, in fact, I'm seeing them now on a lot of like young athletes, guys that are in high school or in college. And you got to be an athlete. Like, you got to be jacked to be able to pull it off. You have to have that kind of like Chad energy of being able to command a room and everything. But the interesting thing about a mullet is it's like a mohawk or like the undercut or any of these other things where it demands that you pay attention to it. And if you have the personality and the energy and the charisma that you can back that up, and a lot of times the youth, because we're still largely driven by a youth culture, then you can absolutely go for it. So yeah, I'm seeing a lot of young guys do it and make it look really cool.
So is that just that things just kind of eternally spin in circles? Like they'll come in and out of vogue through time based on, like, what is it about that brings it back? Like, why are they coming back?
Man, okay. I think that that's part of it. And I think that this is reflective of the same thing that we see where it's like they're doing a new Ghostbusters movie. And how many remakes of Ghostbusters have we seen over the last... Everything from a film perspective that's coming out is just a remake of something that we had in the past. It's all nostalgia driven. I personally think that one of the reasons why we are on this big kind of spin cycle, why we keep rehashing all these styles, is because we are not a culture that is building upon its foundation. And so we're not actually moving into new territory. And so what do we do when we want something that feels new? We just go back to something old and try and rehash it in a new way, as opposed to building something completely new. I think it would be very different if we had, again, a good, like, healthy family culture. I wonder what our clothing would look like now compared to what it looked like in the 20th century, because what it looked like in the 20th century was different than what it looked like in the 19th century. And it wasn't just a rinse and repeat of, you know, in the 1940s, they were wearing just a little bit different of a version of what they were wearing in the 1890s. It wasn't like that at all. It was a completely different thing. And so I think we're kind of caught in this eddy in the river where, because we don't have a foundation, we don't have this rope to kind of pull us out of it, we just keep cycling and cycling all over again.
I'm going to ask you the same thing about handlebar mustaches, but I want to tell you a personal story about it first. A couple years ago, I decided to wear a handlebar mustache for Movember. What do they call it? Mustache November?
Yeah, or Movember. Yeah, it's
for
the
men's
cancer
health,
awareness.
I think it is, yeah. And it was weird because it significantly changed the way that people that don't know me interacted with me.
Oh, yeah.
And actually in a good way. It was like it almost broke the ice with people. People would talk to me easier. They would joke with me easier. They would let me in easier because I had this, you know, very visible thing on my face. Is that something that you've ever heard of or seen? Or
Totally. I see the same thing a lot with something like bow ties, where it's almost to the point where it's so far removed from what we normally see that it becomes a little bit cartoonish or a little bit costumey. And people will immediately recognize you as, one, somebody that's comfortable with having other people pay attention to you. You don't grow a handlebar mustache if you want to like hide in the shadows.
Yeah.
But two, also somebody that doesn't necessarily take themselves too seriously. Because if you did, like, you're not going to be a young up and coming attorney or in the finance world or something else and grow a handlebar mustache, because it doesn't signal that same credibility, that same kind of aggression or anything. And so I think the combination of those two aspects is absolutely why people will go, no, he seems like a likable guy. He seems like an amiable guy. So I'm going to go talk to him, and it absolutely would put people at ease.
Interesting. All right, so you get to know clients individually and lead them through a process of improving their wardrobe. Tell me about some of your client transformations.
I just did an email on this to my list this week. One of my favorite things about my client transformations, and this bugged me for years, because being involved in strength training in the fitness world, you get to see these like monster transformations of guys that go from like 260 and they're 30+% body fat to being 185 and they're shredded, and we expect these transformations to be this really big thing. And when I first started coaching, that was what I did with my clients, is I would lead them to these really big transformations. And I found myself getting pretty frustrated in my first couple of years because I would follow up with these guys 5 or 6 months later, and they would actually be back to dressing the way that they were before, because that felt like that was congruent with who they were, whereas this new version, while it was aesthetically better, was a costume, and they felt like they were putting on a mask, or they were trying too hard, or any of these other things that made them feel very self-conscious about it. As I fine-tuned my process over the years, I found that the most important thing that I can do with my clients is get a really good understanding of not only where they currently are with their style, but why they are where they are with their style. Because the best transformations aren't these complete 180-degree turns. It's fine-tuning by 10, maybe 15 degrees, to the point where if I post up a before and after photo on Instagram, I'll get a lot of comments saying, I don't see a difference, or I don't notice a difference. Because it's not about that big of a transformation. What it's about is when you go into work and people start to treat you differently and they don't know why. And it almost kind of pisses them off that they don't know why. Because it's like, I don't know what it is, but you're just more confident than you used to be. Or I don't know what it is, but you just carry yourself differently than you used to. Or you seem to just speak up more in meetings. Or if it's dating, it's all of a sudden you have more success. And it's not because you're projecting this entire different image, but your body language changes and your posture changes. You're more willing to approach women that you're interested in, or it's all these little subtle things. And so my best clients, my best transformations are the ones where I can tell that their peers are frustrated because they don't know why they're better, but they're better. And those are the ones that my clients feel the best about too.
Well, that's an interesting insight, because like I build websites for a living, and there's just something about a good-looking website, a well-designed website, that is hard to fake.
Yeah.
And people think they can do it all the time, and in their own mind they think, oh, it looks great. But when other people look at it, they're like, no, this is like an amateur site. There's
Exactly.
just and it does come down to, the size of fonts and the spacing and the images that are used, and so for a website, it sounds like that transfers to the clothes that we wear. There are just certain colors that go better together,
right?
And certain pieces that work, textures and other things.
Right, and you as a designer can articulate that. But somebody who's just looking at an A/B test of these two websites that doesn't think about it that way, they're going to get really frustrated. Well, it's like, I don't know why. They're both black words on a white background. Why does this one look so much better? And they don't recognize, like this is a Helvetica font versus a Times New Roman, that this has all of these other little things, and it's exactly that same thing with style. Whereas what most people do is they try to turn it from this like really clean looking page into like MySpace was back in 2004, where it's all these flashing backgrounds and the music and your top 8 and all of that. And a lot of guys do that with their style, where they think this is not executing well, so I have to demand more attention in order to be able to execute well.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, I gotta ask, worst client ever?
I would say the guys that I have the hardest time with are It's usually like either software engineers or Bitcoin millionaires that really lack in any sort of ability to think beyond what I can quantify. Like basically, if I can't quantify it, I don't want anything to do with it. Because so much of teaching people about style, especially teaching men about style, is helping them tap into their kind of left brain way of thinking, and helping them learn that emotions are not bad, and emotions need to be, the masculine response to emotion is that it needs to be channeled and expressed, not completely suppressed or avoided. And a lot of these guys, they have so much more inner work that they need to do before I can do any good for them, that I've learned that I need to stop taking the guys that are that way and say, no, I need you to go do something else. And then when you get better at this, then I can help you get there. Especially because a lot of them still get caught in this very binary A, B, like this is good or this is bad. You know, a suit is good and a t-shirt is bad. And it's like, well, it's not. It depends on where you are and who you're around and what you're doing and what you're trying to communicate and how you perceive yourself. And so you have to teach them this kind of like divergent approach as opposed to a very convergent A-B binary approach to aesthetics.
That was a really hard question, a great answer to a really hard question. So you run a style coaching program in addition to individual coaching. And one of the quotes that you are trying to do is improve their relationship with appearance. Now, for most men, I'm afraid their relationship with appearance is like that girl who is crushing on them as a kid. They don't even know they have a relationship with style.
Right.
How do you get people to realize they have a relationship with style?
That's honestly my biggest hurdle. Like when I get asked by other people, what's your biggest competitor? Or what is, and I feel like I'm kind of like Netflix where they compete with sleep as opposed to, you know, Amazon Prime or Hulu or something else. My biggest competitor is not some other coach that does something. It is this very uniquely like post-boomer idea that real men don't care how they look, and that the only appropriately masculine relationship that you can have with your appearance is this feigned indifference to your appearance. And I say feigned because if these guys really didn't care about how they dressed, then they would be showing up in garbage bags or their wife's dresses or pink gorilla suits or anything else that you can just kind of find and throw on. But it's ironic that they all end up looking exactly the same. They just happen to get there because their apathy leads in there. No, they've just embraced the uniform of indifference, and it's a very intentional aesthetic. And so helping them realize that not only do you actually already care about your appearance, but I can help you care about it in a more healthy, more expressive, more aspirational way. That's the big challenge.
Nice. We're gonna do a different camera angle now. So anyways, back with Tanner. So the word fashion is noticeably absent from your website. What do you think about fashion?
I don't like fashion. I think fashion is flighty. It is, okay, the best way that I can describe it is the fashion is something that is created by cultural elites. It's created by the people that run the men's magazines or the people that have the couture lines. But basically it is these people create clothing and then you buy it and consume it and then you build an identity based on what the clothing is. So it's basically you allow somebody else to create your identity for you. It starts from the outside and works its way in. Style is the complete opposite. It starts with who you are, what your core values are, what your relationship with yourself is, what your relationship is with the world around you, and then knowing how to express that in a way that not only reinforces it to you, but adequately communicates that to the other people around you, especially the people that matter. So fashion starts from the outside in, style starts from the inside out.
Would it be safe to say that fashion just isn't manly?
Yeah, because again, I would say that there is that it's that more consuming more than you produce. And so if you're buying into fashion, you're letting somebody else dictate what your identity is. I would say that's not masculine at all.
All right, so you have a free quiz on your website. It helps you determine the style archetype. You have 3 of them: rugged, rakish, and refined.
Yes.
How do you describe those, and how did you settle on 3?
Cool. So the way that I break those down, and again, this is good timing on this question because it kind of piggybacks off of your previous one. When we start with style, and that's who we are on the inside, one of the easiest things that you can determine is how you relate to the world around you. And so the archetypes are based on that. A lot of times guys will say, oh, I think I'm this, or I think I'm that, or I would like to be this because I like the aesthetics of it, but really you have to start with actually who you are. So the rugged archetype is men who primarily interact with the world physically. That's where they thrive. And it may be something like a blue-collar worker, the lumberjack, it may be a cowboy, it may be somebody who is an athlete or a musician or something else, but they work that way. They're happiest when they're engaged with the world physically. The refined archetype is defined as men who enjoy the idea of the social world, hierarchies, systems, structures, and all of that, and the way that they thrive is by playing by the rules. It's by following what all those rules are and knowing, you put in your time and you make a good impression on the boss, or you date the right girl and all of those things. And there's a lot to be said for that. The rakish are the guys who understand all of that social world and the hierarchy just as well. but they thrive by breaking the rules or by going against the grain and by doing things that are outside of what's expected instead. And so most of us will have a very strong lean in one direction for all three of those. That's what the quiz will do, is you can go answer some questions that are not related to clothing at all, and it will tell you which of those three is your primary. But all of us have some ratio of all three within us. So you're going to have some element of refined, some of rugged, and some of rakish. And good style is being able to express that in a way that is actually relative to what your ratio is between the three of them.
So I took the quiz. Turns out I'm rugged.
Oh, cool.
I like to find the perfect suit and tie to go together before I go wild boar hunting.
Yes. You're basically just a British aristocrat, right?
Actually, my archetype is refined. I think, it probably makes sense given that I run a necktie company, but are ties a good fit ever for rakish and rugged?
Yeah.
Or is there a certain type of tie? What are your thoughts there?
I started, it's actually the intro to my book. I have an uncle who is a recluse. He lives in a tiny town in Idaho, never been married. He's a falconer, loves his dogs, just about as rugged as that archetype can get. Hates the idea of wearing suits. And a few years ago, his mom, my grandma, passed away. And this was while I was working for a custom suit company. He knew he needed to wear a suit for the funeral. Part of that was her wishes, is she wanted all the men there in black suits. She wanted all the women there in black dresses. And because he loved and respected his mom, he was going to comply with that. He was going to do that. And he came in, and it was really fun to get to talk to him and help him understand that there's a way that we can do a suit, we can do a tie, and really the biggest part is texture. We did a flannel suit, we did a wool tie, and all of a sudden it felt like it was still him, so that he could dress in a way that was appropriate for mourning his mom and respecting her wishes, but not in a way that he hated every single second that he had that thing on, and it actually distracted him from being there in the funeral. It provided this beautiful balance for him. And so again, when you know things like texture or pattern or color or print or width or what kind of knot you want to wear versus how it fits within the collar type and all of these little things. I mean, one of my favorite little rakish things to do is normally I have a pretty wide spread on my collar, but I always do a smaller 4-in-hand knot. And I get comments on it all the time. That's the wrong knot for that collar. That's, I can see the I know, I do it on purpose. I like kind of breaking the rules. It's a fun way to play with it. And so there's a lot of ways that you can express all three of the archetypes, even with something like a necktie.
So I mentioned my archetype. What's yours?
I'm primarily refined, but I have good doses of rugged and rakish in them too.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I think there's another archetype for you that you haven't identified yet, and here's a couple images just to make the point. So I think we've determined that you really need another one, and it's called Wolverine.
That doesn't fit with my 3 R's, man. No, but he's a really good example of that rugged archetype. Super physical. There's a lot of rakishness in there because his kind of grisly go-to-hell attitude, but he embodies that rugged archetype incredibly well.
Nice. I love ties, obviously. Is there something that I should know about ties that maybe I don't know? Is there something you know about ties that you think maybe I wouldn't know?
The thing that I learned that I didn't know and I loved most when I really understood ties, and part of this again was working in custom suiting, being in more of that kind of menswear world, is that hand-sewn ties that are like hand-rolled, especially grenadines or something else where you get the imperfection of it, where it doesn't look completely perfect. There's bunching and knotting, and it kind of gets this 3-dimensional where you don't just have width and length, but you also get this depth that comes into it. That just adds so much more beauty to a tie. And so I love imperfect ties. I love those that look like they've been made by a real person as opposed to something that's just been printed off of the assembly line. And when you can gain an appreciation for that depth and that texture, your tie game totally opens up.
Nice. Well, I do have a free tie for you today. This is our Trinity tie. This is great for the Trinity knot, if you've ever
I have seen the
that.
Trinity knot, yeah.
And this is, all of our ties, they have a nice thick inner lining. They're self-tipped. And so if you ever want to wear a Trinity,
awesome.
There you go.
Thank you. See, and this is another one, like I love the texture of this woven silk. This is great.
Yeah, I think this one's actually, it is woven. I think this one may be polyester.
Gotcha.
But most of our new ones are silk.
Cool.
So I like polyester because it's more cleanable. It's also 1/3 the price of silk.
Right, so a win there.
They're a lot more affordable. But I'm thinking about mostly going towards silk ties now in the future because we're a small brand and I want to start where there's more of a margin so we can stay in business easier.
Cool.
Quick fun thing I want to do, little necktie trivia. We'll see.
Okay.
We'll see how well
Oh man,
and the viewers
I'm gonna be bad at this.
know necktie trivia. The modern necktie descended from Europe, where it began how many years ago? 400 years ago, 900 years ago, or 100 years ago?
I'm gonna go with 4.
Boom.
Okay, because I'm thinking like cravats and all that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Yep, 400 years, and that leads into the next question. International Tie Day is celebrated on October 18th in the country where it originated. What country is that? Is the country France, Croatia, Italy, or China?
France.
Ooh, that's close. It's actually Croatia.
Really?
So, yeah, during the 30 Years' War in early 1600s, Croatians wore like a neckerchief that they tied really interestingly. And that gained attention in Paris, which is how it became
expanded from there.
Spread worldwide. So
Very cool.
You know, partially right, because France had a play in it, but
Right.
it really
That's
began
awesome.
in Croatia. Last question. Popular type of tie originated in the 20th century in America, actually. Necktie.
I'm thinking just like the rep tie, right? Like the rep stripe.
Rep stripe. I don't even know what that is. I gotta look that up.
That's the one that they like that the WASPs wear in boarding schools, where it's basically almost like this, but the striping's a little bit different because it would represent your schools. Yeah.
Okay, that's not this one, but maybe I didn't know
That's the
about
wrong
that one.
century. That's probably 19th or maybe even 18th century.
Yeah, I'll have to double check that, but that's not the answer. Any other guesses?
The bolo.
Yep.
Yes.
Nice. I don't know that I would have gotten that, but yeah, the bolo tie is believed to have originated in Arizona.
Only in the 20th century.
Yeah, apparently. And
Interesting.
A cowboy's hat blew off. He put the string around his neck. The other cowboy said, "That's a nice looking necktie," and the bolo was born.
Oh,
so,
I love it. Beautiful.
All right, so a little bit more about knots, and then we'll move on to the last section of the interview. What necktie knot are you wearing? Do you know any other necktie knots? And I think maybe you already said what your favorite knot is, but yeah.
I almost always do a double forehand.
Okay.
Because I like the asymmetry of it. I like that it's smaller, and honestly, I like to wear my pants a little bit higher waisted, and so I need the double to take up some of that space so it doesn't hang super low.
Okay.
The first one I learned was
Let me ask you this before we go on. So with the double forehand, is that just that you wrap it around 3 times?
Yeah. Yep, 3 times and then pop it in.
Okay.
Right. And there's even little different ways that you can do it. One of my mentors, Derek Blazard, he likes to do it where you pop it around, but then you do it through all of them so that you get this little like peak of one of the other loops that's in there. I like to just do it through the top one. There's little ways that you can play with it that way. Yeah.
Oh, that's interesting. I have not heard of that, so we'll have to do some study after this. I did know the forehand knot. I didn't know that there was a double forehand knot. Any other knots or favorite?
So I grew up doing the half Windsor. That's the first one my dad taught me. I didn't learn the forehand until I was serving as a missionary for my church, and that was just because that was the easier one to do. I went through and learned how to do the double Windsor, and I'm not a fan of anything like the Trinity or the Elridge. I think that it largely kind of robs the dignity of the tie and can turn it into a little bit more of a goof than a tie should be. Yeah.
So one piece of feedback about that, the other knots are actually crazy trending.
Oh yeah, no, they're huge.
Which is interesting in and of itself. I think it's a lot of kids. They don't want to wear a regular necktie.
Right.
If you've never worn those knots, what's super interesting is how few people notice.
Oh yeah.
Almost nobody notices. And
you have to be kind of a menswear nerd to pick up on it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because it just looks like a tie most of the time, and people don't pay that close attention to a tie.
Yep. So it's very one of those like in-tribe signals for the people that know what they're looking for.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But some backstory there. Suit accessories. We all know the neckties are downtrending. It's questionable how long they'll be around. What are some other suit accessories or formal accessories that you think are going to stick around for a while?
I'm of the opinion, I don't wear a tie all the time when I have a suit on, but I always have a pocket square in, every single time. There's just something about it that makes it feel completed. And so there's that. I like the opportunity to do anything that's a boutonniere or something else when it's appropriate to do so. But other than that, I think we're continuing to see a move towards simplicity as opposed to eccentricity, but who knows where things are going to be in the next few years. Yeah.
All right, great answer. All right, we're going to take a break. We'll come back with Tanner. Sorry.
No worries, I like the boots too. Tanner boots are great.
We'll come back with Tanner Guzy in a moment. All right, so we are in the home stretch of the interview, the last section, which is stand up. I actually think this section will be a little bit shorter because I couldn't find much about your life related to this section of our mission, but maybe you'll surprise me.
Cool.
So stand up is all about action. We've learned, we've wised up, we're prepared, we've suited up, and now we're ready to make a difference in the world. How can Gentlemen Wise help you or others improve the world? Are there causes, organizations, groups that you think we should know about, or any other thoughts on what you're up to these days in improving the world?
I think one of the biggest mistakes that I see consistently in the 21st century is the idea that the best way to change the world is to focus on changing the world, and we got to go big. Whereas the reality is that the best way to change the world is to start with yourself and then with your family or with your immediate sphere of influence. If you're donating to causes but you don't know who your next door neighbors are, you're doing it backwards. If you are trying to protest events or run for office or write political screeds or engage in all of these other kind of like big grandiose things, these are good things, but you're not connected to the people in your immediate vicinity, you're doing it backwards. And I think sadly one of the reasons why we tend to do that is because it's a way to convince ourselves that we're trying to improve the world, but then when it doesn't work out, we can just say, oh, I'm just little old me. There's no way that I could solve world hunger. I'm just one guy. I don't have the ability to do that. But when we start off within our own particular sphere of influence, this is kind of very Jordan Peterson-esque of, you clean your room. You start off with what you have control over, and then you watch that expand out into other arenas. And so it starts with self-development, and then leading the way with being social. And if you're married, obviously lead your family and do things that way. If you're a young and a single guy, build a fraternity and improve the lives of your friends and get to know your neighbors, whether that's the house next door, or the guys in the dorm room next to you, or whatever else, but start on that smaller scale.
That's awesome. And actually that's what our Wise Up is all about. Like, we want to start with individuals, and that's partly what Suit Up is about too. We want to prepare ourselves. And are there other causes like that you support, or that you plan to fight for, or that you plan to support?
The biggest thing, and I'm not involved very much with official organizations or big causes that I can say like donate to these guys or go check this out. This is actually one of the things that we are doing with Chest Magazine. Is I'm of the opinion that the old paradigms of left versus right, or Democrat versus Republican, or a lot of these other kind of things that we used to be divided by, are largely irrelevant. And the big thing that we're experiencing is this idea of, do you think that people are inherently capable of becoming noble? Or do you take more of a nihilistic approach of, we're just going to breed in circuses and sit poolside and exist in our realm of hedonism until we die, and that's the purpose of life? I think that this is kind of the big battle for our generation. And so anything that you can be engaged in to pursue nobility. Maybe it's participating in this men's magazine that I'm involved with, that we're trying to showcase and feature guys who are doing this. Maybe it's becoming part of a church and pursuing religion again. Maybe it's just some other version of masculine idealism where you are engaged with and are supporting other men that are doing things. You can do this on any social media platform. You can go to events or conferences where this happens. You can network with other people. You can stand up for truth and nobility and goodness in the workplace as opposed to catering to the constant descent into nihilism and everybody's special and we have to cater to all of that. So those are the things that I would say are the big things on a larger than a personal or on a family level.
Nice, I love it. So standing up implies courage. It implies doing something courageous. Is there anything that you've done in your life that took a particular amount of courage?
Yes, I can think of a couple of things. The one that's probably most relevant to what our conversation today is was making the jump almost 5 years ago from working for a custom suit company to being totally self-employed and having my coaching gig and everything related to masculine style being my full-time thing. I wasn't ready. I had not made enough. I had 3 kids at the time. I hadn't made enough money the previous year for that to be a good call. And I remember coming home and telling my wife, it's like, now's the time to do it, and kind of expecting, it's like, okay, how are we going to be able to, how am I going to help her see this? She's not going to fight me on it, but how am I going to help her see it that, you know, this is a risk, but we're good. And very much to her credit, she said, awesome. I wish you would have done it 6 months ago. Let's go. Right? And so, but there's social risk, there's financial risk, there's physical risk. I remember 3 years ago, I took my first boxing bout, and getting in the ring for real was something that required a little bit of courage. But courage, I've found, is a muscle like anything else. The more you exercise it, the more you flex it, the stronger it grows. And so you can do that, again, social ways, emotional ways, aesthetic ways, financial ways, spiritual ways. But the more you engage in it, the easier it is to be courageous.
Nice. Who are some of your heroes, men that exemplify this virtue of standing up or of courage or of action?
The biggest one that I can think of is George Washington. I'm going through a biography on him. It's by Ron Chernow. It's called A Life. And I'm almost embarrassed or even ashamed to think about how much you know kind of like the broad strokes of who Washington is, but I had no idea the depth of that man's character, the sacrifices that he made, his willingness to do things, his absolute courage, not only in the political sphere, but his courage on the battlefield and all of these things. I mean, he's one of those where you look at him and just go, I am small and pathetic and worthless compared to the caliber of a man that he was. And in a lot of ways, I kind of look at it and go, okay, what would Washington do in this kind of situation? Yeah.
He was pretty awesome. I just recently read 1776 and loved some of the stories there about Washington. One thing that was really interesting is the book ends at the year 1776.
Oh, interesting.
The war continued for 5 more years, but that first year was kind of pivotal in the miracles that we're seeing, as well as kind of Washington becoming the general that he eventually became. So let's see. I think that's it. Is there anyone else that comes to mind that you think would be good to interview, that you think would align with our mission of wising up, suiting up, and standing up? If not,
that wears ties.
That's not a requirement.
Oh man,
men's wear accessories, but
yes,
even not men's wear accessories. I mean, we're just all about helping men wise up, suit up, and step up. And by the way, suit up doesn't have to mean suit.
No, it just
means preparation.
Yes. Okay, I would say my business partner with Chest, Jack Donovan. He's someone that's worth talking to because he embodies this in a very different way than I do. Here, you'll check him out, and he is jacked. He is tattooed up. He embodies all of these things incredibly well. So yeah, I think he'd be a great guest for you.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Tanner. Thank you for tuning in. It's been a pleasure to have Tanner Guzy on the channel, and hopefully we'll see more from him in the coming years and decades as he continues to build his career. Anyways, thank you for tuning in. This is Ben signing out.